The first time my neighbor's son blocked my driveway, I figure it was one of those little things people do without thinking. The second time, I realized it was intentional. By the third time, well, that was when a tow truck ended up teaching their whole family a lesson they still probably talk about at Thanksgiving. My name's Daniel Mercer, and I've lived on Hawthorne Lane in Columbus, Ohio, for a little over a decade now. Quiet street, mostly older homes, a lot of folks who wave from their porches and keep to themselves. The kind of neighborhood where everyone notices when somebody paints a front door a different color. I liked it that way. I'm not complicated. I work long hours managing inventory for a hardware supplier across town. I mow my own yard every Saturday morning, and if I have free time, I'm usually in my garage fixing up old furniture or tinkering with something I probably don't need to be tinkering with. I've always believed if you respect people's space, they'll respect yours. Turns out, not everybody agrees with that. About a year ago, the house next door sold to a guy named Preston Hale. Mid-50s, polished pickup truck, expensive sunglasses, always seemed like he was trying to look busier than he actually was. Friendly enough on the surface, but there was always something underneath it, like he treated every conversation as a competition nobody else knew they were in. His son Mason started dropping by a few times a week. Mason was maybe 24, 25, drove a lifted black Silverado loud enough to rattle windows before he even turned onto the street. Nice enough smile when he wanted to use it. But he had that habit some people have where they assume every space around them belongs to them unless somebody physically stops them. And somehow, he decided my driveway counted. Now, my driveway is impossible to misunderstand. It's a clean concrete strip between our houses with painted borders on both sides. I repainted those white edge lines myself the summer before. Kept them sharp. Kept them visible. There's no confusion. Street parking is legal right out front. And yet one Tuesday around noon, I pulled in after taking early lunch, and there sat Mason's truck, parked square across the mouth of my driveway like he'd personally reserved it. At first I just stared. Then I parked behind him and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. I remember tapping my steering wheel and thinking maybe he was literally grabbing something and would be right out. At minute 15, the front door next door swung open, and Mason came strolling out carrying a paper bag from a sandwich place like he didn't have a care in the world. He looked at me sitting there trapped halfway in the street and gave me this little shrug. Hey man, relax. I was only inside for a second. A second. I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, more because I couldn't believe somebody could say that with a straight face. I rolled my window down and said, calm as I could, hey, I need access here. Next time, just park on the street. He nodded like he understood completely. Yeah, sure. Then he climbed in and drove off. And I really thought that was the end of it. 2 days later, I got home from work, and there he was again. Same truck, same spot, blocking my driveway like the conversation never happened. This time I walked next door and knocked. Preston opened the door with a coffee mug in one hand, and that expression people get when they already know why you're standing there, but plan on pretending they don't. I kept it respectful. I said, hey Preston, Mason's parked across my driveway again. I already talked to him earlier this week. Can you ask him to keep it on the street? He barely even looked past me. Then he took a sip of coffee and said, he's not hurting anything, Daniel. I gave him a second. He added, you're making this bigger than it needs to be. And there it was. That little edge. That tone. Like I was the unreasonable one for wanting to get into my own driveway. I looked at him and said, it's private property. He smiled. Not a warm smile either. One of those smiles that says he'd already decided he wasn't taking me seriously. Come on. He's there 10 minutes tops. I nodded. Got it. And I walked away. No arguing. No raised voice. But something changed right there. Because there's a difference between misunderstanding somebody and deciding their boundaries don't matter. That evening I sat in my garage with the door open while the sun dropped behind the trees, just thinking. My friend Carl from 2 houses down was out watering his lawn and wandered over. He asked, everything all right? I told him what happened. Carl snorted. Preston's testing you. Testing me? Yeah, he said. Some folks move in and they start pushing little boundaries. Fence lines, parking spots, noise. They want to see what they can get away with. I didn't answer right away because honestly, he wasn't wrong. And once I saw it that way, All the little interaction from the last few months started lining up. Preston parking halfway over the property line while unloading lumber, leaving trash bins angled against my fence. Always small enough to dismiss. Always just enough to annoy. Like he was counting on politeness to keep me quiet. Carl looked at me and said, "You're going to keep knocking?" I leaned back against my workbench and stared out toward the driveway. Then I said, "No." And for the first time since Preston moved in, I stopped trying to convince him to respect my space. Instead, I started figuring out exactly what my options were. The next morning on my break at work, I called the city's non-emergency line. I didn't go in angry, didn't rant, didn't even mention Preston by name. I just asked a simple question. "Hey, if someone blocks access to a private residential driveway, is that towable?" The woman on the line didn't hesitate. "Yes, sir. Immediate tow authorization. No prior warning required if access is obstructed." I asked her to repeat the municipal code section, wrote it down on the back of shipping invoice. Then I asked one more question. "If this happens again, do I need police present?" "Nope. Contact any licensed tow provider." That was it. Clean. Simple. No gray area. At lunch, I called a towing company a few miles away called Buckeye Recovery. The dispatcher sounded like he'd heard every neighborhood dispute in Ohio at least twice. I explained the situation. He chuckled and said, "Private driveway obstruction? Yeah, happens more than you'd think. Save our number." So I did. Under one word in my phone. Driveway. That evening felt strangely peaceful. I grilled burgers out back, listened to cicadas, sat on the patio with a beer, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel irritated. Because there's something calming about knowing exactly where the line is, and knowing the next move doesn't involve arguing. 3 days went by. Nothing. Then Tuesday rolled around. Warm afternoon. Blue sky. I got home a little afternoon because inventory shut down early. And there it was. Black Silverado. Parked perfectly across my driveway, like Mason was trying to recreate the exact same photo. I actually sat there for a second and just stared. Then I laughed. Not angry. Not dramatic. Just all right. I pulled over. Opened my phone. Hit driveway. Buckeye Recovery answered on the second ring. "Buckeye." "Hey," I said. "This is Daniel on Hawthorne Lane. Private driveway blocked." The dispatcher immediately recognized my voice. "We'll have someone there in 15. It took 11. I remember because I checked. Tow truck came around the corner, slow and steady. Bright orange lights flashing. Driver climbed out. Big guy named Leonard. Gray beard. Didn't say much. Just looked at the truck. Looked at my driveway. Then looked at me. "This yours?" "Nope." He nodded. "All right then." He started hooking it up, and I swear it felt like a movie. Steel chain. Hydraulic lift. The front tires rising off the pavement. No jilling. No chows. Just a very expensive truck being calmly introduced to consequences. Halfway through, Preston came flying out his front door. He had that panicked walk where somebody's trying to look in control while already realizing they aren't. Whoa, what's going on?" Leonard didn't even pause. "Private tow authorization." Preston looked at me. "You serious right now?" I kept my voice even. I asked Mason twice. "I asked you once." He threw his hands up. "Daniel, come on, he was inside for 5 minutes." I shrugged. "Then he'll be out in time to meet the truck at impound." That landed harder than I expected. Preston's whole face changed. Not anger first. Shocked. Like it genuinely never occurred to him somebody might actually follow through. Mason burst out of the house a second later, sandwich in hand, and just froze. He looked at Leonard, then at me, then back at his truck halfway off the ground. "You've got to be kidding me." Leonard muttered under his breath, "Nope," and kept working. The truck rolled out, turned the corner. Gone. Street went dead quiet. Preston stood there staring at the empty curb, then looked at me. You could have knocked. I met his eyes. I did. He opened his mouth, closed it, then walked back inside. Later that afternoon, Carl texted me. "Saw the tow truck. Everything good?" I wrote back. "Driveway's clear." He replied with 6 laughing emojis. By evening, Mason had his truck back. Cost him $285. And for about 3 weeks, peace. No blocking. No attitude. No word comments. Honestly, I thought maybe that was enough. Lesson learned. Everybody moves on. Then one Thursday afternoon, I got boxed in. I got home around lunchtime and parked in my driveway because I had a virtual supplier meeting. Meeting ran long. I walked outside around 2 planning to grab coffee, and there sat Mason's truck. Again, this time angled tight enough across the entrance that I physically couldn't get out. I stared at it and felt that weird calm settle in. Not frustration, not disbelief, just okay. I knocked once next door. No answer. Could hear voices inside. TV running. Laughter. They were home. They just weren't opening. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds. Then pulled my phone out. Driveway. Leonard answered. Again. He laughed. Be there shortly. This time Mason noticed. He came rushing outside while Leonard was backing in. Hold on, I'm moving it. Leonard glanced at me. I said, he's been blocking me over an hour. Mason threw his hands up. It was 10 minutes. I pointed at my porch security camera. It records timestamps. That shut him up immediately. Preston came out right behind him. Now he was mad, like genuinely furious. This is ridiculous. Leonard kept lowering equipment. Preston stepped toward me. You're doing this on purpose now. That one almost made me smile. I said, Preston, the driveway hasn't moved. Car was outside watering again and nearly choked trying not to laugh. Mason looked embarrassed. Preston looked like steam might come out of his ears. And Leonard? Leonard just kept doing his job. Hook, lift, secure, done. Truck disappeared for the second time. This one cost more. After hours processing plus overnight storage, because Mason waited until the next morning. Just over $300. And that should have been the moment they stopped. Any reasonable person would have backed off. But Preston had too much pride for that. The next week, he filed a formal dispute with the city. Said the tow was excessive. Said I was targeting them. Said there needed to be a review. And the city, because paperwork is paperwork, open one. At first I was annoyed. Then I realized something. The city wasn't reviewing me. They were reviewing the complaint, which meant they were reviewing his property, his parking habits, everything. And once inspectors started looking, they noticed more than Preston expected. A lot more. 2 city inspectors showed up the following Tuesday around 9 in the morning. I was out front tightening a loose hinge on my mailbox when their white sedan pulled up. Clipboards, reflective city badges, professional faces, the whole thing. One of them introduced herself and asked if I was Daniel Mercer. I said yeah. She explained they were following up on a parking access complaint connected to a tow dispute and needed to verify driveway access and surrounding curb usage. I stepped aside. Take all the time you need. And they did. They measured the width of my driveway, checked the painted boundaries, took photos, asked if there had been repeated obstruction. I answered honestly. Twice towed. Multiple prior incidents. No dramatics. No embellishing. Just facts. Then they walked next door. And that was where things got interesting. Preston was outside in less than 30 seconds, trying to smile through clenched teeth. I could hear bits and pieces from where I stood. Happy to cooperate. Probably just a misunderstanding. Mason only stops by briefly, but the inspectors weren't there for opinions. They were there for measurements. And Mason had apparently built himself a habit nobody had paid much attention to until now. He'd been parking halfway across the sidewalk whenever he came by. Not enough to seem outrageous. Just enough to force people walking by to step around. I noticed it. Carl noticed it. Everybody had. But nobody wanted to start a thing over a few feet of tire. City inspectors noticed those few feet. Turns out they noticed them very carefully. The woman crouched, measured curb distance, took more photos. Her partner wrote notes. Then they looked at Preston's side gate. There were garbage bins stored too close to the sidewalk easement. A landscaping trailer parked partially over setback. Nothing dramatic by itself. But together? Enough. Preston kept talking. Tried to explain. Tried to soften everything. Tried to make it sound harmless. The female inspector finally looked up and said, commas could be, sir, harmless and compliant aren't always the same thing. That one landed. Hard. Carl happened to be trimming hedges across the street, and later told me he almost applauded. By noon they were gone. Preston slammed his front door so hard I heard it from my kitchen. Then everything got real. 3 days later, city envelopes arrived. I know because Mason pulled into the driveway, his own driveway this time, grabbed the mail, and stood there reading. Even from across the yard, I could see his face drop. He marched inside. Preston came out 5 minutes later with papers in hand, looking like somebody had personally betrayed him. Code enforcement citations. One for repeated sidewalk obstruction. One for easement encroachment. Combined fines a little over $400. On top of both tow bills. Storage fees. Administrative review fees. And the best part? The dispute he filed got denied. Official finding. Tow valid. Vehicle unlawfully obstructing private access. No reimbursement. No reversal. Nothing. That evening I was on my porch with iced tea when Preston walked over. Not storming. Not puffed up. Just tired. And honestly older than he looked a month before. He stopped at the edge of my steps. Hands in pockets. Didn't look at me right away. Then he said, "You really weren't bluffing." I took a sip. No long silence. He nodded once. Then finally looked at me. Mason shouldn't have kept parking there. That was probably as close to an apology as I was ever going to get. I said, I asked politely. He gave one small, frustrated laugh. "Yeah, you did." Then he looked over his shoulder toward his house, back at me, and said something I actually respected. "I thought you were just going to complain and eventually let it go." There it was. The truth. Not really about parking. About assumptions. About believing some people won't push back if you keep pressing. I leaned back in my chair. Most people probably would. He nodded, then walked home. And just like that, it was over. Mason started parking on the street like every other visitor on Hawthorne Lane. No more blocked driveway. No more angled tires over the sidewalk. No more pretending private property was flexible depending on convenience. And honestly, the neighborhood got quieter after that. Carl still jokes about it every now and then. Calls Buckeye Recovery my unofficial valet service. Leonard, the tow driver, actually waved at me once at a gas station and asked if things were peaceful. I told him yes. He said shame. Easy money. That made me laugh harder than it should have. But every now and then I still think about how small the whole thing was when it started. One truck, one driveway, one guy deciding 5 minutes of convenience mattered more than somebody else's space. And how fast little entitlement turns expensive once reality gets involved. Because I never wanted revenge. I wasn't trying to humiliate anybody. I wasn't looking for a neighborhood feud. I just wanted access to my own driveway. That was it. But there's a strange thing about boundaries. Reasonable people usually respect them immediately. And the people who don't, they tend to act shocked when consequences finally show up with flashing lights and a hydraulic lift. So now I'm curious. Be honest with me. After the second time, would you have kept knocking? Or would you have called the tow truck even sooner? Drop your answer in the comments, because I've had neighbors tell me I was too patient, and a few tell me I should have let it slide. And honestly, I still wonder which side most people would have taken.